All right, folks, so we're going to go ahead and get started here in a minute. Just wait for a couple extra stragglers. So in the minute or two, just to see if anyone else is able to show up, I wanted to get a quick feel for who is in attendance today. So I'm wondering if you are the runner of a service, like if you have a web application or another service that you're running for end users, could you raise your hand? All right, so we got one maybe. Are other folks just end users of two-factor authentication, or is anyone else using two-factor for like an internal service, running something for employees at work? Okay, so we got a lot of that. More of the enterprise than the consumer end? Okay, very great. And do the services already have two-factor? Are people already offering two-factor of at least one type? Okay, awesome. Does anyone not yet have two factors looking to integrate it? Okay, awesome, great. Very good. All right, looks like we have a decent mix, but a little focus on the enterprise. That is great to know. So why don't we go ahead, we'll get started. If anyone else joins, they can feel free to walk in. One last note, there is a QR code if you have the app for Secure World. Feel free to come up, say hello afterwards, scan it. You can win something amazing, I've been assured. And yeah, let's go ahead and dive into it. So, right off the bat, some quick administrative notes. First, yes, the slides will be available afterwards, so don't feel like you need to write down every detail or take pictures of the slides or anything like that. They'll be up online. And assuming I'm able to stick to the time schedule, hope to have a Q&A session afterwards. So take quick note of anything you want to hear more about, specific question you might have. Hopefully we can get to that at the end. But I will be hanging around afterwards as well. So if we don't get to anything, do come say hello. I'd love to meet you, and we can talk about anything we didn't get to during the talk today. All right, so quick recap on why do we even need two-factor? Now, it's not going to surprise folks that passwords can be compromised in a whole range of different ways. Now, regardless of how the password gets compromised, if that's the only thing protecting the account, then the attackers are into that account and might even be able to take it over entirely. So adding a second factor of authentication hopefully will keep that account secure, because the attackers will need to launch a different type of attack in order to obtain the second factor, but it also provides a trust signal to the provider of the service that if someone's logging in, even if the password is legitimate, providing that second factor is additional trust that the user is who they claim to be. So there are three factors of authentication: knowledge, possession, and inherence. And knowledge, self-explanatory, that's something you know, like a PIN code or a password. The second category, possession, is something you physically have. That might be a phone or a tablet. It could even be software running on your desktop, or it could be a smart card or a USB security key. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. And the third category, inherence, now these are biometrics. Think thumbprint to unlock your phone, or becoming more popular, a picture of your face. Could be an iris scan. And at least in the context of consumer web apps, which I'll be touching on today, biometrics typically aren't used for remote authentication. So we're going to limit the scope of two-factor today to something you know and something you have. So we're going to be talking about 4 different methods of two-factor today. The first is SMS, receiving a text message. The second is time-based one-time passwords, or TOTP. If you've ever used the Google Authenticator app or Authy or any of these similar apps, you'll be familiar. The third is push notifications. If you've ever used Google Prompt, that's their implementation. This is where you get a notification on your phone just asking you, is this you trying to log in? And you click yes or no. So we'll dive into details of push. And then we're going to finish up with U2F, Universal Second Factor. And typically that takes the form of security key like USB that you plug into your computer, an actual physical piece of hardware. So my goal during the talk is to largely convince you of some of the content I sent out in a tweet earlier this month. And we can see that I have a couple of rankings of the 4 methods I just outlined. And the first ranking is according to security. So taking into account the vulnerabilities that each method has and how good a job it does at actually proving something you have. Now, you can have an extremely secure method of two-factor, but the user experience is absolutely critical to assuring that users actually use it and turn it on. If it's too difficult to either set up or use on a daily basis, then users won't turn it on. If they don't turn it on, then they're not receiving any security benefit. And then blending security and user experience together, we get yet another ranking, and I hope to convince you of something along these lines, if not this specifically. So the first method we'll dive into is SMS. Now, quick second poll of the audience. Who here has a phone that can receive a text message? Not a trick question, right? Pretty much everyone. So the fact that SMS is so ubiquitous is a large factor in the user experience and why it's so ubiquitous in terms of rollout, especially in the consumer space. But as we're going to talk about the security problems associated with SMS, rank it right down near the bottom in terms of security. So we're going to be following our through workflows today. And in terms of SMS, she starts off the registration process on her account by putting in her phone number. After she does that, the service provider is going to generate a one-time password that they hope Alice will receive and echo back in order to prove that she has her phone. Now, in order to do that, they send it to the phone company, and the phone company will forward the text to the device associated with that phone number. And the phrasing there is really important, and we'll come back to that in a minute, but the text goes to the device associated with the phone number, right? I'm getting a lot of head nods. So hopefully after Alice does receive the text message, she'll type in the OTP to her browser to finish off the workflow. Now in the day-to-day authentication, her actual login experience is almost identical, except the registration saved the phone number already, so she'll put in her password and kick off the same workflow. Now, we have a big box around the phone networks. So the phone networks are a big source of vulnerabilities for SMS. There are people problems and technical problems. So first, we're going to talk about some of the people problems associated with the phone company. Now, whether you call it SIM hijacking, SIM swapping, number porting, SIM cloning, at the end of the day, the big problem here is that attackers can use social engineering to convince someone at the phone company that they are Alice. They can impersonate her identity and convince someone at the phone company to deactivate Alice's SIM card and activate a new one associated with their phone instead. And once this happens, as you expect, the text is not going to end up in the right place. So once the attackers use the previously stolen password to log in, this causes the generation of the OTP as it normally would. And here's where we come back to our phrasing. The text is now being sent to the device associated with that phone number, which sadly is no longer Alice. So once they get the OTP, they're in her account. So this is a specific example. In June 2016, a Black Lives Matter activist had his Twitter account taken over. Social engineering on Verizon, they were able to swap out the SIM cards and sidestep the SMS two-factor that he did have enabled on his account. Some additional examples. In December 2016, Forbes reported that social engineering was used again to sidestep SMS 2FA and steal millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin from online accounts. So this had a huge impact for some people. And in August 2017, the New York Times reported that this trend is actually only continuing to increase, becoming more of a problem. So many people rightly say, well, the phone company should do a better job verifying the identity before they make any changes to SIM cards. And while unquestionably I agree, the answer is yes, that can be difficult. There's a lot of information for years that's been online that folks can use to impersonate identities. And thanks to Equifax in 2017, this has become much more of a problem. So, in fact, in just last month, in February, T-Mobile sent a text to the vast majority of their customers informing them of a industry-wide phone hijacking scam. In fact, they have a page on their website dedicated just to this problem. And no one can read that, so zooming in, they explain, our industry is experiencing a phone number port out scam that could impact you. This sounds obviously not good. And they have a recommendation which includes, consider checking with your bank to see if there's an alternative to using text for PIN authentication. To me, that sounds a lot like don't use SMS for two-factor. So in addition to the people problems, there are technical problems. One of those technical problems has to do with Signal System 7, or SS7. Now SS7, if you're not familiar, is a series of protocols that handles routing phone calls and text messages throughout the global phone network. It was originally designed back in the 70s, and shockingly, over 40 years later today, it's still at the core of the phone network. Now back in the 70s when this was designed, security was not top of mind, and SS7 remains inherently vulnerable to abuse. So we can see with our workflow, Alice is unfortunately in the upper right corner, sadly unaware of what's happening here. And after the attackers log in with the stolen password, the OTP gets generated, and by abusing SS7, they can route that text message directly to their phone instead of Alice's phone. Of course, once they get the OTP, they're in the account, game over. Now this is much more than a theoretical problem. It has been known about for years and years and years, but in the last couple of years has become much more acute as people have demonstrated attacks using SS7. In May 2016, a company called Positive Technologies demonstrated an attack where they could take over WhatsApp accounts. What do WhatsApp accounts do? They receive text messages. In addition, someone created a company specifically to exploit SS7 and other issues with the phone network to spy on any phone around the world, including receiving text messages. Though things became even more intense in May 2017 when a lot of outlets reported that attackers were able to use SS7 vulnerabilities to sidestep SMS 2FA on people's bank accounts in Germany, and they ended up just draining all of their funds. So this shows that it was a much more scalable attack than people thought previously, and draining bank accounts really drove the point home for people that SS7 is vulnerable to abuse, and this is a huge problem, especially in the context of SMS 2FA. Ars Technica picked it up as well, and now we're going to step away from the phone network a little bit and talk about some other problems inherent with using SMS for two-factor. We're going to focus on phishing attacks. Now, Google recently conducted a study with UC Berkeley and found that phishing was the most effective way to hijack an account by an order of magnitude. So phishing is an industry-wide problem, and not all two-factor methods handle it well at all. So you can see in this workflow, Alice believes she's logging into the real website, and once she provides her password to the phishing site, they'll turn around and use that to log into the real website. Doing that will, of course, trigger the OTP to be sent through the phone network. And once Alice receives it on her actual phone, again, Alice thinks she's on a real website, and she knows that she has two-factor enabled, so she's expecting to receive this text message. So once she receives it, she's going to take the OTP, type in the 6 digits, and once she does that, they can go ahead and use that, and they're in her account. So hopefully you can see that SMS has quite a number of vulnerabilities, and in fact, it does not really prove something you have. However, it's really important to point out that SMS two-factor is unquestionably better than nothing. If the alternative is to not have two-factor at all, SMS is definitely better. But as we're going to talk about, other methods of two-factor are significantly more secure, and the important thing is to understand who your users are and what methods they have available to them. If they have a smartphone or the ability to spend a little bit of money on purchasing some hardware, or if you're in the enterprise context and you can provide hardware to employees, SMS is basically to be avoided for SMS. So the second factor we're going to talk about here is time-based one-time passwords, TOTP. It is a method that's significantly more secure than SMS, but it does have some convenience problems, especially when compared to other methods like push that we're going to get to. So taking a run through the registration flow for TOTP, we see that once Alice kicks it off, the service provider is going to display a QR code and prompt her to scan it with an Authenticator app on her trusted device. Now, if this is the first time Alice has ever interacted with TOTP, she's not going to have an Authenticator app, so she'll have to go to the App Store and install something. Now, normally the service provider will provide some guidance here and recommend maybe Google Authenticator or Authy or some other specific app, but any app that implements TOTP will work, and so Alice is going to be able to make a decision based on the user experience that she prefers. Once she has that app, Alice will go ahead and scan the QR code, and something very important happens in this step, and that is a shared secret is saved onto Alice's trusted device. And we're going to get back to the shared secret. It's foundational in how TOTP actually functions, but there's two things to highlight. The first is that the shared secret is shared. There's a copy on Alice's trusted device, and there's a copy on the server. And the second is that the shared secret is secret. No one should have a copy except for Alice's trusted device and for the server. Right? Now, if you're thinking, okay, someone's going to steal it. Well, yes, that is a problem, and we're going to get to that, but we'll come back in a minute. So after Alice scans the QR code, the Authenticator app on her trusted device will automatically generate that 6-digit OTP that she needs to complete the process, and she'll go ahead and type that in the browser. So this is an example of Google Authenticator, which is a common TOTP app. You can see it displays one row for each account that's registered. It has the 6-digit OTP required. It also has a little countdown on the right-hand side. So every 30 seconds, a new OTP is going to be generated. Now, as I said, Alice only needs to install one app. I have many here in this example for my phone because I like experiencing the different options that are out there and doing research. But Alice only needs one, and it will work for any service that supports TOTP. So the next time Alice comes across a different service that supports TOTP, she can use that existing app she already has and scan the QR code just as she did before, type in the OTP, and complete the process. It becomes a little bit easier after you've already installed that app. And luckily, on the day-to-day actual login experience is even simpler yet. You can see here, Alice just puts in her password, gets to the next page asking for the OTP, and she can take out her app, look up the correct account, type in the OTP, and she's good to go. Now, another important thing to point out here is that there is no phone company involved here. There's no third party, and so there is these codes are locally generated on the trusted device. So that means that you don't need to have a network connection, either a cell connection or a data connection. This is really helpful for folks, especially if they're traveling internationally or if they don't have a reception for whatever reason. OTP is a nice usability win there. So you might be wondering, okay, the OTP is generated on the trusted device. How does the service provider know that that's the correct 6-digit code that they're expecting to receive? Now, under the hood, TOTP uses an HMAC. Typically with SHA-1, but other cryptographic hashes can be used as well. And there are 3 different properties I want to quickly outline to understand how this actually functions. Now, the first property of cryptographic hash is that they're deterministic. So the same inputs are always going to provide the same outputs. We can see here that the inputs on running this algorithm on the trusted device, for example, is the shared secret and the current time. And ignoring some math details, out is going to pop the OTP from that. The same exact calculation can be run on the server. And so because it's deterministic, they're going to get the same OTP. Now the other property, the second property, is that cryptographic hashes are one way. If you have the output, you cannot calculate feasibly the input. So this means that if someone is able to observe a one-time password over the network, they can't use that to calculate the original shared secret, which would allow them to generate other codes. And the third property is the property of uncorrelatability. That's a mouthful, but essentially it means even the smallest change to the input of this hash should result in a drastically different output that can't be correlated with any of the other OTPs that we've seen previously or that we'll see in the future. And what this means in the context of TOTP is that if someone's able to observe multiple OTPs in a row, maybe they can see 10 in a row, that's still not enough information to determine the original secret, and it's also not enough information to determine what the next valid OTP is going to be. So, taking all those properties into account, essentially this means that the best attack someone can launch trying to guess the next OTP is a brute force attack. And brute force attacks are pretty trivially handled by implementing a simple rate limiting system that allows even, if someone types in the OTP wrong, maybe you give them 10 or 15 tries, but that's not going to be nearly enough guesses for someone to brute force the next value. Though it is important to highlight that because this OTP is valid for 30 seconds, someone could just be insanely lucky and guess the correct value. So that is not an ideal security property, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, of course, TOTP has vulnerabilities of its own. Now we're back to the question of someone stealing the shared secret that needs to be remain secret. So, first place that might happen is on the service provider themselves. So the service provider wants to make sure that this secret is stored securely, so that if a data breach does occur, the shared secret is not sitting in plain text right next to maybe password hashes that could be brute forced. And if you get the password and you have the shared secret in plain text, well, you can generate that OTP and essentially completely nullify two-factor. So in order to store this securely, unfortunately, we can't use a hash like we would to store a password securely because we need the original input to run this calculation, and hashes can't be reversed. So that means that the service provider is going to encrypt the shared secret before they store it in the database. Now, this is a fine solution, but anytime you start dealing with encryption, you have key management problems. So if you store the encrypted shared secret in your database, that's all well and fine, but where are you going to store your encryption key? Now, of course, there are solutions to this problem. You could use a hardware security module or some other implementation. But the point is, the service provider does have information that in the event of a data breach could completely nullify two-factor authentication for TOTP. So the second place the shared secret could be stolen from is Alice's actual trusted device, right? So it could be as simple as the trusted device being a phone. She loses it when she's out for the night, right? In that scenario, it's very unlikely that someone who randomly comes across her lost phone is also going to have her password. So likely she's okay in that scenario. She'll be able to log into her account, revoke the shared secret, and hopefully everything's fine. Alice could also be targeted by someone who already has her password. Though that's probably less likely, if that does happen, you want to make sure that the trusted device has full disk encryption enabled so that you're protecting the device and protecting that shared secret. Also, need to point out the issue that this shared secret is stored on a device that runs software. Anytime you do that, you have to worry about malware. So you could have malware on a phone, you could have it on your tablet. If the desktop computer is acting as a trusted device in a certain way, of course you could have malware there designed to steal this secret. So you need to be aware of handling for malware. So just like SMS, TOTP is vulnerable to phishing attacks. So once Alice provides her password to the phishers, they'll turn around, just as SMS, they'll use it to log into the real service. Now when they do that, they're going to be prompted for an OTP. And phishers are smart, so they're going to ask Alice, hey, what's your OTP? Can you just tell it to us? And because Alice thinks that she's on a legitimate website, and she knows she has TOTP enabled, of course she's expecting to enter something. So once she does that, they'll turn around, use the OTP, and they're in her account. Now, TOTP, of course, has its own usability challenges as well. First is, if you actually do lose your trusted device, how are you going to get back into your account? Now, recovery codes are a very common paradigm, and typically they are displayed to the user during the registration process. And they say, download these, keep them somewhere safe, trust us, you might need them if you lose your phone. That's fine, but TOTP also has another option, which is to use multiple trusted devices. So if anyone here has, say, a tablet and a phone, you can install the app on both, and during the registration process, scan that QR code with each device. Now the shared secret is going to be on both those devices. Maybe your tablet's at home, and if you lose your phone, then you can use your tablet to log into your account. The important thing to point out here is that obviously both devices can generate valid OTPs, so every additional device you add increases the complexity to make sure you're aware of where those devices are and that they all have full disk encryption and they're protected, etc., etc. So in addition, if someone is being responsible, enabling TOTP on as many services as possible as they navigate around online, this is a good thing. But it also means that they're going to get many, many, many entries in their Authenticator app. And this can be a huge pain to scroll through, find the right account with the tiny name in the bottom, and all the time the codes are changing. So, of course, not the end of the world, but when you have to do this every single time you log in, that can be pretty annoying. Another annoying thing, maybe I open the Google Authenticator app, I see the time is a little less than half, but I'm feeling pretty optimistic today, and I'm like, I'm not going to wait for a new one, let's do this. So I look at the first 3 digits, I type them into the computer, and I come back to get the second 3 digits, and it's rotated. Didn't get the second 3, now I got to delete, do it again. Again, not the end of the world, but when you have to do it every time you log in, this adds up. So hopefully you can see that TOTP is a lot more secure than SMS, but it does have some properties that are not desirable in terms of being able to randomly guess an OTP, and also the fact that a service provider could be compromised, and if they're not setting up TOTP correctly, that can lead to big issues revealing shared secrets. That brings us to our third method, push notification. Now, push is more secure than TOTP, which we're going to get into, but one of the big wins here is user experience. So instead of dealing with any of those annoyances with the Authenticator app I just outlined, you can get something that looks like this. There's a notification sent to my phone saying, are you trying to log in? Click yes or click no. You don't have to manually type anything in, scroll through stuff. This is a lot nicer to do. So let's talk about how this works. So registration flow is going to be kicked off, and Alice is going to need to install another app from the App Store. But this time, the app is going to be usually specific to the service that she is enabling push with. Once she installs that app, she needs to authenticate in that app. So after she authenticates, what's actually happening here is a public key is being shared with the service provider. And we're going to get back to the public-private key and the use of public key cryptography here, but just want to highlight that's happening in this step. Now after that happens, Alice will get the push notification. She can click yes, and process is finished, push is enabled on her account. Let's take a look at the authentication flow. Once Alice puts in her password, she's going to receive a push on her phone asking her yes or no, is this you? And the important thing to highlight here is that the push notification sent to her device does not contain a shared secret, it does not contain an OTP, it doesn't even contain the information about the session that's trying to be authenticated. What it does do is it says, hey mobile app, please securely connect to the service provider, and then after you do that, on our secure, mutually authenticated connection, we'll give you the information about the session we're trying to authenticate. We'll tell you, where it's coming from, the device, etc., etc. So once that happens, then Alice taps yes, and what's happening here, back to the keys, is that Alice is sending a signed message to the service provider. And once the service provider gets that, they can validate the signature with the public key, and they know that it came from Alice's device. So this is not an OTP you can guess. They have a much stronger assurance that this actually came from Alice's device. Just like anything else, push has its own vulnerabilities, and common theme, phishing problems. So once Alice puts in her password, turn around, log in, a push is sent to Alice's phone. Now, if Alice clicks yes, then they're in her account, game over, right? But some people may be thinking there is some information in that push notification saying, what location is this login trying to come from? What device is it coming from? And that's unquestionably true, but let's dive into this just a little bit deeper. Now this is my fictitious, highly scientific phishing page with Google spelled with zeros instead of O's. It will trick everyone. The point here is that Alice does not verify the URL and realize something's wrong. Okay? She's probably pretty busy, just like everyone, looking to log into her account. She's relying on muscle memory and visual cues. So she sees the Google logo, she's like, yep, I'm on Google, let's do this, and she logs in with her password. Similarly, when she gets the push notification, she's going to see the Google logo, probably not read this information because she's expecting to receive a push. She knows she has this enabled on her account. And so with muscle memory, clicking yes here gives the phishers access to her account, and if she does read the information, this could avoid the phishing attack, but probably a lot of people are going to be clicking that yes button. So let's talk about some of the usability problems. I mentioned this in passing, but most often you need an app specific to the service that is trying to use push. So in the example of Google, this is going to mean, well actually it is built into Android because most Android phones have the Google Play Services app already installed. On iOS, if you want to set up push with Google, you need to install the Google Search app. Similarly, for Namecheap, you need to install the Namecheap app, etc., etc. But I should point out, Duo and Authy are two companies that are incumbents in this space, and you can essentially outsource your two-factor authentication to these companies. They already have mobile apps created, and if someone has those apps installed on their phone, that's going to be the only one app they need for any service that integrates with Duo or Authy on the back end. So that is nice, but of course as a service provider, costs are associated, and depending on users and other things, got to balance all that out. So just like anything else, I could lose your phone, and though some services support adding multiple devices to receive those push notifications, this is completely dependent on the service provider, whether they support that or not. So recovery codes are going to be another common approach for account recovery. So quick recap on push. We can see that it's security leg up on TOTP because of the use of public key crypto. And if the service provider does experience a breach, the only thing they have are the public keys. That's not enough to authenticate into anyone's account. So we've also addressed the problem of service provider compromise. So this brings us to our fourth and final two-factor method we're going to talk about, universal two-factor, U2F. Now typically that is like these security keys here, if anyone is familiar. If you're not, this is unquestionably the most secure method of two-factor, but it also has very high barriers to adoption in a consumer context. Now we talked that a lot of folks in the audience are in an enterprise context, and if you have folks who can address some of the problems I'm about to talk through and make decisions for employees, that is certainly making the adoption easier. But let's take a quick look on what it might look like for an average user in a consumer context. So as I said, you need to buy this security key. So anytime I need to buy something, I'm sure many people do the same, go to Amazon. So just go to Amazon, type in U2F security key, and up pops some stuff. But as an average user, I have a lot of unanswered questions here. I'm not familiar with the brands. I don't know the price ranges. I don't know if the model I'm going to buy is going to work with the different services I'm hoping to use it on. I don't know if it's going to work with my computer and with my phone. So there's a lot of unanswered questions, but Yubico is a company that was involved in actually creating the U2F spec originally, and on their website they have a very helpful little quiz where you can answer some questions like, what kind of ports do you have on your computer? And they show pictures and everything, so it's very user friendly. And they'll walk you through and they'll recommend which of their specific products will work for your use case. Now this is great, but if someone doesn't know that this quiz exists on Yubico's website and they purchase something through Amazon, chances are pretty good it's probably not going to work for every use case that they want it to work on. Now this security key that I have here, this costs 18 bucks, right? And this works with my computer here, but it does not work with my phone. So if I want one of these that works with my phone, I need to get one that supports Bluetooth Low Energy or NFC. And they do exist, but now from 18 bucks, we're looking, at least in the Yubico sense, of 50 bucks. So 50 bucks for the average regular user is a ridiculously high hurdle to get past. I mean, the average user won't even enable SMS two-factor. They unquestionably have a phone that can receive text. So paying 50 bucks for something, especially in the consumer context, pretty difficult. In addition, this works for my computer right now, but if I were to have a little bit newer model Mac that had USB-C ports, this doesn't work anymore. Got to get one that's USB-C. So I could buy a dongle, spend more money, or I could buy a new Yubico key that can be anywhere up to 60 bucks. So the financial thing here is the big source of adoption, especially in the consumer space. So let's talk a little bit about the registration flow. Now the user experience here is actually pretty awesome. You start the registration process, you put in the security key, you tap with your finger, and then you're done. There's just nothing else to do. That's pretty awesome. Now what's actually happening under the hood here is that a key pair, again, public key crypto is just the magic sauce for U2F. A specific key pair is being generated for this specific origin. And we're going to come back to that in a minute, but a unique key pair is generated for Google, for example, if we're trying to log into Google. Now, the user experience for Alice, if she's just logging in, is exactly the same. She'll put in her password, then she'll be prompted to put in the security key, tap it, and she's good to go. User experience is pretty great. And this is actually really elegantly hiding a lot of the complexity under the hood. So let's take a look at that. So the first thing that's going to happen is that the service provider is going to generate a challenge. And they're going to send that challenge to the browser, who will proxy it to the security key. In addition to proxying the challenge, what gets proxied is the current origin. So if we are on Google spelled with zeros, that super fishy weird website, the security key is going to say, I do not have a key pair for Google with zeros. There's nothing to do here. U2F is inherently resistant to phishing attacks, which is a fantastic property. That also applies to most man-in-the-middle attacks. The only that it wouldn't apply to is that if someone is able to obtain a cert for the service provider and impersonate them at that level, this doesn't prevent against that, but preventing against everything else, man-in-the-middle attacks and phishing, is a pretty good step in the right direction in terms of security. If a key pair does exist for that origin, what will happen is the private key will be used to sign the challenge, which will be proxied back to the browser and back to the service provider. Once the service provider receives the signed challenge, they're going to use the public key that was associated during registration to verify that signature, and if everything checks out, then authentication is successful and everything's good to go. Of course, nothing is without its own usability challenges, so the first thing you need when logging in here is to actually have access to your computer, which I assure you is under that stack of paper somewhere on my desk. Now, once you actually have that, you need to have a port available to put in the USB. When I'm working at home and I have my webcam plugged into my USB port on the left side and my keyboard and mouse, which unquestionably I need to work in a desktop mode, on the right-hand side, I have no USB ports left. So now I either need to buy a dongle or a hub, spend more money on that, which is not great, or I need to unplug my webcam, put this in, tap it, put my webcam back. Again, not the end of the world, but that can be frustrating. And if someone's trying to use U2F on a desktop, maybe it's under the desk, or maybe it's not directly accessible. So these are the things you need to think about. So what happens if I actually lose this? Well, the first thing, and this may be more applicable for privacy-conscious folks in the consumer space, or in the enterprise space, maybe some more options. But you can have multiple security keys. So some services for U2F allow you to register multiple keys. So this is my primary key. But at home, I have a backup key. So if I lose this, I can go home, use my backup key, everything's fine, right? But again, that's more money. In the consumer space, it's another 18 bucks here. But if I'm using one that works on my phone, that's another 50 bucks. That's another 60 bucks. So it's kind of a big ask. And of course, you can always use recovery codes just like any other method. So hopefully you can see U2F in terms of security is pretty elegant and pretty fantastic. It's resistant to phishing attacks. It's resistant to most man-in-the-middle attacks. And the use of public key crypto means that if there's a compromise on the service provider, the only thing that's getting exposed is those public keys, which is not enough to authenticate. So some really nice properties. The downsides, again, is you got to buy this stuff, and then you got to carry this thing around. So the last and final point I want to leave with here is least common denominator. Now, on my Google account, I have U2F enabled. I know what I'm doing. I'm security conscious. I bought a couple of these things. Everything's great, right? Well, Google allows you to enable multiple different methods of two-factor. If I didn't know what I was doing and also had SMS enabled, well, someone's going to try to get in my account and say, yeah, I lost that security key. Just give me a backup method. And they're going to use SMS, which has all the associated vulnerabilities. Now, a lot of services also have a separate process from authentication for account recovery. So if I have U2F enabled for authentication, but the recovery process for accounts relies on SMS or something, maybe support staff isn't trained up as much as they should be, then the least common denominator for someone to get into my account, I no longer have the security assurances that come with U2F. It's whatever is enabled on the account for authentication, recovery, and everything else. So takeaway here, look at the big picture. Make sure that you understand all of the different channels for someone to log into an account and that it's providing the security that you expect and also that the user expects. So with that, that's the last method. We do have some time left for Q&A. I think I was mostly able to stick to the time. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to shout them out now. But I will be hanging around after. So do please come say hello. I would love to meet folks, talk about your use cases, and any details that you have. I have some cards up here. And if anyone wants to scan that QR code on the speaker badge I have over here, feel free to do it. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. All right, so does anyone have any questions?
I have a couple questions on the universal two-factor. Maybe I missed it. When and how is the secret key generated for that device?
Sure, definitely. So in U2F, during the registration process is when this key pair is going to be generated.
Okay.
And so kick off the process, and then it's going to prompt you. It's going to say, okay, you're registering a key, put it in, tap it. And it's essentially running through this same workflow during registration in the background. And the origin that it's being registered with is being associated at that point. So each different origin is going to have its own unique key pair. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. So what happens if that device gets stolen?
This device here?
Yeah.
Nice. So if this does get stolen, then it depends on how it's implemented. However, the vast majority of these security keys are created in such a way that they don't have onboard memory. So that allows these things to be much less expensive to produce. But what that means is essentially there's a private key embedded on here. And instead of storing all the private key pairs that are generated on this device, the private key embedded here will wrap that private key. And the wrapped key and the public key will both be sent to the service provider. So if someone finds this, not only take that into account, but also the usernames of my accounts aren't stored on here. So they're not going to know what my username is for any of the accounts I have registered. And then, of course, also they won't have my password. So if I know someone and they know my usernames, that gives them a little more info, but without my password, should be good.
So what have you found in the enterprise with that? I mean, in most companies, I work DoD, right? So they want you to shut USB ports off. So what are you finding with that?
So shutting off the USB ports certainly is a problem. Well, there's a backup slide in there somewhere anyway. But Yubico's homepage has phrasing that says like trusted by enterprises around the world, right? They have 3 testimonials again from like Google, Facebook, others. It's rolled out for a lot of their employees, and I assume they have USB ports available. I don't know, but I used to do consulting work in the government space, and so, for example, if you're working somewhere and you're not allowed to bring your phone with you, then TOTP and all that other stuff's not going to work. These things might work, but they might not let you take it home. Might have to stay at work. And if you meet all of those criteria, you need to have a port. If you don't have a port, you're in trouble. Maybe Bluetooth could be an option. There are some that can use Bluetooth not only with the phone, but also with the laptop. But it all depends on what they have available in the enterprise. But yeah, without a port, it's going to be kind of a tricky situation. Yeah.
What about using a biometric as the second factor? Just too inconvenient to require a fingerprint scanner or a facial scanner?
No, definitely not too inconvenient. So using a biometric, so it's most prevalent, especially for most folks with your phone, right? Scan your thumb, take a picture of your face, which I guess the iPhone can do now, all these things. Those work great for authentication to get into a local device, right? But the problem is that in web context, where something has to be sent over the network in order to verify the authentication, in terms of biometrics, what's that going to be? You don't want to send your actual raw scan of your fingerprint because you only have one fingerprint. You can't cut off your finger and get a new finger. So if you send your fingerprint over and someone gets that, you're in trouble. If you use the biometric to generate some kind of encryption key or use some kind of trickery like that to send it over, then I believe there are some mechanisms set up like that. But at the end of the day, it really boils down to problems with what is actually being sent over the network. And for all those use cases with the phone, that's all happening locally. And so you don't have to worry about those problems. Biometrics are great, but then you run into other problems too, like if your fingerprint's on your phone and someone gets your phone, people have demonstrated, oh, there's your fingerprint, thanks, right? With the new Face ID stuff, Apple claims can't do it with a photo, only works for real people. That's been debunked as well. I mean, they're trying to improve biometrics, but in NIST's guidance in 863B, they specifically call this out, and they're basically like, there's an error threshold. You need to be above a certain amount to consider this biometric trustworthy to use. And in my opinion, it's shockingly low, like 90-something%. Well, like, that's not good enough for me. There's still like, what, 5-10% time you're just going to let someone through?
Right.
So it depends on the context. For most folks, unlocking their phone, for their threat model, that works really well. It's convenient, et cetera, but really depends on the context.
Great.
Anyone else? Any other questions, comments? Great.
Yeah, got my YubiKey key.
Yes, there we go. Great. Well, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate everyone attending. Thanks a lot.